I would like to say welcome to Bob Churchill. He is the Communications Officer of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. He has a long-standing interest in humanism, secularism, and the philosophy of ethics. And he has worked previously with both the British Humanist Association as well as the Humanist Association in Uganda. And during that time, he has contributed to some high visibility campaigns and managed various events and fundraising initiatives. And I think that the title of today will be Humanize Your Atheist Bus Campaign, okay? That fits very well into our theme for this conference. So, welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much. As was mentioned, I used to work at the British Humanist Association around the time that the Atheist Bus Campaign was running. I was there from 2008. I now work at the International Humanist and Ethical Union, where again I'm in charge of campaigns and communications. And I'll talk more about some of the international work in the workshop session after lunch, for those who are in that. And in between times, I worked at UHASO, the Uganda Humanist Association. So that was more general kind of capacity building work with the Uganda humanists. I just want to talk a little bit about IHU first, because despite being the communications officer for a couple of years, I know that not everyone will have heard very much about IHU, the International Humanist and Ethical Union. It's the sole global federation of humanist, atheist, rationalist, secularist, skeptic, laïc, ethical, cultural, and free thought organizations. I think you can always tell when a slogan has been written by committee. In this case, an international committee. It's even got the French word laïc in there. So this is a map of the world. IHU was founded in 1952 in Amsterdam. We're registered in New York City. Our headquarters is in London. That's where I work now alongside the BHA team. We have staff in India and staff in the UK. We're represented at the United Nations in various places, and again I'll talk about that in the workshop session for those of you in that after lunch. We're a democratic organisation, so our executive committee is elected up from the member organisations, generally speaking. So member organisations such as the Swedish Humanists nominate members, and they can be elected onto the various committees. We have a youth organisation, IHEO, which is certainly growing over the last few years, running large events in Belgium and elsewhere. I'm just marking up there various places where we've sponsored events and conferences in the last few years, including South America, which is a big sort of growth area at the moment. Demographically, there's a lot of opportunity there, and there are over 120 member organizations in more than 40 countries around the world. And just very briefly, some of the work that we're doing, we help groups grow with funding, training, and direct assistance. Some of that will be through conferences, some of that is through direct contact on the ground. We represent humanism and our policy agenda at the United Nations and other international bodies. So we're trying to take the kind of policy agenda shared by the humanist member organization to that international level that maybe individual national groups can't always get to. We work towards our policy agenda through media, talks, and other resources, of course. And again, we bring humanists together for conferences, regional conferences. Things like World Humanist Congress in Oxford in the summer was a really big opportunity where we were able to do some of the training and discussion and forward planning that we like to see. Two projects, just to mention two examples of work that again I'll talk about in the workshops, are the Freedom of Thought report, which looks at discrimination against atheists, humanists, and the non-religious in every country around the world. We released this, we covered this in every country in the world last year for the first time, and again I'll talk about the United Nations work after lunch. Right now I want to talk about the Atheist Bus campaign. This was a large campaign run by the British Humanist Association, actually back in 2008, so we're talking 6 years ago now. But it's a campaign lots of people have heard about, and I think there are lots of lessons and interesting things to learn about it when we're talking about campaigns and communications. So it's a good example. The basic premise of the campaign was just this. Imagine we can see these adverts on these buses, and it only costs you a £5. So right from the beginning of this campaign, there's a very clear, strong, deliverable message and a nice, cheap outlay for the person who's being contacted. And that's one of the things that, if you've heard of the Atheist Bus campaign, that's something that will perhaps come to mind, is that it was about individuals putting up a small amount of money to fund bus adverts. Another thing that people have generally heard about with the Atheist Bus campaign is that it raised a lot more money than was first anticipated. So there was a target of 5,000 British pounds to start with, which would have bought a certain number of routes on London buses. But within a few weeks, it had raised many times in excess of that. The final target was just over the amount there, 2,791% of the goal target. That sounds really good. That sounds quite impressive, but I'll talk shortly about some of the things that we could have done a bit better with that money coming in, because it was a little unexpected how well it did, in fact. And of course, you may also know that other campaigns were either closely or loosely inspired by the Atheist Buses. There we go. So this is a case study of a campaign. It's just one campaign. I want to talk about the strategy and technology, but also about the ethos of it. How did it come across? How did people experience it? And how did the technology support that? And not just what we did right, but what we did wrong, or what indeed we didn't really do at all. It just happened anyway. So I think there's some important context here. The British Humanist Association, our member organisation in the United Kingdom, the equivalent of the Swedish Humanist Association, had not done anything like this kind of campaign before. As you can see from their website at the time, they do humanism, they campaign on public policy issues, they do humanist ceremonies, and that was probably the main thing that people had heard about with the British Humanist Association before this campaign. The main way that an ordinary member of the public would have come across the British humanists was through a humanist funeral, maybe a humanist wedding, usually funerals. But afterwards, the Atheist Bus campaign is now one of the first things that people often know about the association. It has a Wikipedia entry longer than any individual member organisation of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. So the interest in it, I think, is sort of measured by that. So I want to go into a bit more detail and I'll talk about the story of how it actually came about. The campaign was not initiated by the British Humanist Association. They did not have the original idea. Ariane Shireen is a comedy writer and journalist, and she, way back in midsummer 2008, wrote an article on the Guardian website, British newspaper, in response to adverts that she had seen. It's called Gimme 5. So again, you've gone back to that nice, easy deliverable. It's just a £5, that's all it's going to cost. But she tells a very personal story about how she's walking along the street, and there was a particular spate in 2008 of very religious adverts on London buses, and they were they were just saying, Jesus is here, you can be saved, follow this link. But when you went to the website, as she says in this article, the website is sort of threatening hellfire and damnation. It was a particularly nasty church that was running these adverts. So she said, remember, she's a comedy writer, so jokingly and with no organisational backing, with no plan to actually implement this as an idea, she said, wouldn't it be good if so many of you gave me a £5 and we could buy bus routes and put on some other message? And she proposed a slogan which was, there's probably no God, and I think it was a little more negative than what we actually went with in the final campaign. It was something like, there's probably no God, now just get on with it, or something, get on with your life. Whereas in the end, it was this probably no God, now stop worrying and enjoy your life. So there was a slight more positivity that we finally came to after a sort of collaborative message. But that whole origin of it has kind of got lost in the mists of time, the fact that it wasn't a British humanist idea as such, that she was proposing, and she had no real idea that that would be picked up, or that someone would agree, yes, that was a good idea. So there are some other elements. Again, I want to talk about the ethos of the campaign, like what appealed to people early on. There are a few things in place already, just from the fact that she wrote this article. It's on the Guardian website, so it's already kind of mainstream. It's already getting lots and lots of coverage right from this very earliest mention of it, before the BHA are even involved. But it's on the comment is free section, which again, it's hugely widely read, but it means that it's not an organisation doing it. It hasn't been, no one with an agenda has come up with this idea. It was more like an opinion piece saying maybe we should do this. And it's from someone who is young. She's not part of an established organisation or institution. She's a comedy writer. So I think all those things sort of helped give impetus to the campaign initially, that it felt kind of free and open, that it was someone's idea rather than something or some committee of people that decided to go ahead with it. So in response to her Guardian is free piece, there was already a bit of chatter. Several bloggers started talking about it. The comments on comment is free, there were many people said, yeah, this is good, this is a really good idea. But of course, there was no mechanism in place. She hadn't actually proposed anything. And that was probably good, actually, because it gave people time to think about it. It gave bloggers time to say, yeah, that sounds like a fun thing to do, to sort of show that, almost more to show that putting adverts on the side of buses to the churches, well, that doesn't really help anyone. It doesn't do anything. We can do it too. So it's almost a way of sort of disproving that these are a good idea. This was the first person who kind of mocked up his idea of what the advert might look like on the side of the bus. And John Worth was a blogger who really decided he was going to take the ball and run with it. So he did his own mock-up here with her full slogan on the side of a bus. Not very pretty at this juncture, but all of a sudden it's now a visual thing. All of a sudden people can see what it might look like. So he created a pledge bank page, which is an online tool where you essentially get enough people to say, yes, in principle, if a certain goal is met for a funding criteria, then we will all pay the £5. But this didn't actually work. Some people donated to it, but maybe, as an individual blogger, he didn't personally have quite enough exposure in. There's this point that you start to need to think, well, hang on, this can't just be a conversation anymore, and this won't just happen organically based on blogging traffic. It does need an organisation to push it and do media work, because basically it failed. And that was itself a news story. So enough people had read and talked about this one woman's idea for an advert that the fact that the Pledge Bank campaign by a blogger didn't work was in the Telegraph, a mainstream national newspaper, and negative publicity. Atheists failed to cough up for the London bus ad. But maybe that helped. Maybe that helped cajole potential donors and irk them, annoy them, so that they would come back and show that it could be done. So it was at this point that the British Humanist Association got involved. John Worth, I think it was, contacted the BHA and said, look, this is a campaign. It didn't actually work the first time round. So the BHA said, well, it sounds interesting. There's obviously lots of interest in it. Maybe with some support, we can get Vice President Richard Dawkins to join in with the Richard Dawkins Foundation. Maybe with some organisational backing and media work, we can make something of it. And so eventually, after a few meetings on Gower Street in that summer, this is how the ad looked after a designer friend of Ariane Shireen's, because she was still involved talking about it at every stage with the organisation, the comedy writer. And a friend of hers actually did the design work that you can see here that became sort of emblematic for many of the joint campaigns. So there are three broad qualities that I think for this particular campaign, I'm not saying that these are the right qualities that every campaign should possess, but that I think that made the Atheist Bus campaign work and spread as far as it did into many different countries. One was its organic nature, that it felt democratic, it felt like it came from grassroots, because it really did. It didn't have to be orchestrated that way, it really was a grassroots organization. It was open, it was transparent, and it was efficient. It was very clear when the pledge bank was operating, and it was very clear even once the British humanists were involved, that no one was scraping any funds off the top of this. It was all going to a particular source, so it was efficient. You gave a certain amount of money, and you knew exactly what it was being spent on. There were no hidden variables, as it were. And it was kind of plucky. It was quirky. It was cheeky. It was a strange and unusual and novel thing to do at the time, to ask people to fund the advert, and for it to be on this particular topic, which hadn't been done before. So it had the novelty factor. So there's those three qualities. And I think it's important to sort of note the way that the technology that we used all played into that. We were using WordPress, we were using Just Giving, and I'll talk about these a little bit more as we go along. So before the launch, which came in October in 2008, this was the launch of the page where people could give funding to. A number of things had to be in place. First of all, the Richard Dawkins Foundation had agreed to match the first £5,500 of donations. So suddenly we weren't looking for £5,000, we were now looking for £11,000. It was a slightly bigger deal. And almost much more important than the fact that £5,000 was being matched from one particular source is the fact that it was a person whose name is known, whose name has cachet. So suddenly there's a potential for media interest just because that's true. This was the website of the campaign. There was a very small amount of time, really, over which this all happened. This couldn't wait for a year while someone built a highly elaborate website. This was WordPress. It's open source. It's completely free. You can knock up a WordPress website sufficient for a campaign in a matter of days if you need to. And again, I think that helped with the feel of it. It clearly wasn't a huge corporate, flashy website that people were being drawn to. That's the WordPress backend. We use Twitter, which obviously everyone will do now in a campaign in many countries. But at the time, that was still growing. It was still the first couple of years of Twitter, but that helped to draw in especially journalists and media people at the time who were the main people using it. Obviously, it was on Facebook, so people can be sharing the idea with them. And all of this added up to a large amount of organic interest. This phrase, "there's probably no God," and the word bus was just one way of trying to measure that. So before it had even gone live, there were so many pages that in one way or another had discussed the particulars of this campaign. The mock-ups, as I mentioned, that John Worth initially did, I think they're a really important part of it. If it's just words, then you're already distancing a large number of people who need some pictures in their media articles. It's important to be able to visualize what the end goal is in this case when you're asking people to fund the actual project. So it needs to look good, and I think those first mock-ups where it was quite bland, it was just black words on a white background, weren't as appealing, and maybe that was part of why the pledge bank didn't push like it could have done. So all of a sudden, because you've got it on a t-shirt and you've got a mock-up of it, it looks like a real thing. Zoe Margolis is an author who had now become involved with the BHA. At the time, she was writing an anonymous sex blog in the UK and selling a book off it with a pseudonymous author name. This very short blog, where all she says is, things I'm doing today, repeatedly clicking reload page here and grinning widely from ear to ear as I watch the donations increase and the silent majority finally speaking out. So all she's saying is, there's a link here to this fundraising page, I'm enjoying it, people will keep giving. That page gave more traffic to the Just Giving donations page than any other source, including the media. Also, as this page went live on the 21st of October, people were more widely, this was another blog discussing the growth and saying, you know, oh, this proves God equals fail because look how fast and far it's gone. So people were getting excited about the fact that it was happening alone in and of itself. And I just wanted to pull out there the brilliance of Google Ads advertising the God who wasn't there on this random blog. The Register picked it up. Again, you see that sort of celebrity element. Now it's Dawkins' atheist ad campaign. Suddenly, the BHA has disappeared in this particular article because celebrity has taken over. And I think that's an interesting factor in and of itself. It's a brilliant thing for getting a hook in, but sometimes a celebrity element takes over everything else and an organization may lose the spotlight. But there it is. There's the page, the Just Giving page at the point when I think this is a few days later, but the initial target of £5,500 that would be matched was met by 10:06 a.m. on the morning that the campaign went live, so an hour after it went live. This graph shows donations over the first few days, so the morning of the 21st is at the beginning, the evening of the 25th is at the end, so it's an hourly progression of donations going into the Just Giving page, and that's the pink line there is the point where the target was met. And of course, then there's a backlash. So you've had bloggers who are broadly secular, humanist, or atheist and are excited about things going on. This is a big church blog in the UK called the Church Mouse, an anonymous insider of the church running a blog talking about the campaign. And Church Mouse says, yes, it's a rubbish slogan from the atheists. We all know that. I mean, you know, so this blog is saying upfront, this is a rubbish slogan. But also the whole premise of this article is how well it's done in a very short space of time. So you sort of think, well, how much better do you think you could have done if you were coming up with a slogan? I mean, it seems a strange thing to call it. She says, it's good that people are talking about religion, even if it does start with negative viewpoints. The power of the web can be used for atheism as well as for the Lord. So she's obviously drawing her own very specific lesson there. And here's her cartoon of there's probably no God bus falling off a cliff being driven by the devil. You can see it at the front there. I mean, Church Mouse didn't draw that blog, but she was using it to illustrate the backlash that the church community sort of had against the campaign. Okay, so we've seen that we used some fairly free and easy distributed technology and social media. I think it cannot be, I mean, it's obvious. I think, you know, this was 2008. I think now that message is so clear to just about everyone. You don't have to be in campaigns or communications to have heard the message that you can use good, free, and social technology to run a campaign. Just Giving, I think, was an important part of this. There are lots of different ways that you can have a mechanism for payment on a site. What justgiving.com provided for the campaign was something worked out of the box. Yes, they take a cut, but you know it's going to stay up. Whereas our own, if it had gone on the British Humanist website and we'd had that level of traffic, the site would have fallen over, almost certainly. And so it would have stalled at 5 minutes past 9 rather than reaching its target. So I think it was worth the cut that they take in this case. It also allowed people to discuss amongst themselves because they could leave comments on the site, effectively tell people why they're donating. And obviously, there's an RSS icon there trying to show its penetration into news channels and follow-up email and networking, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this was the BBC website, no God slogans for cities buses. So now it's finally been a success, and so we've gone from atheists fail to cough up from the Telegraph beforehand to the BBC covering it twice, in fact. No God campaign raises 140,000. They did a sort of follow-up. And that was the 4th most popular read story on the day of the launch, this one, No God slogan for cities buses. So it really had this feedback effect. People got excited about the fact that it was exciting. And so we saw more and more traffic coming from the BBC. So there was that element was the fundraising part, and then there was us trying to capitalize on that interest and on what had happened. So now you've got the money, you don't just spend it on the buses and do nothing. Now the point where the bus is ready to go, when you've printed the bus cards and there is a bus for them to go on, you can do a launch campaign. So the picture there is of Richard Dawkins stood by an actual bus with the actual slogan on, with the media invited to a kind of press launch event when the buses were about to actually hit the roads. And again, that means Ariane Shireen can come back and do another article about how now it's all worked out, and her idea that she had linked back to the Gimme 5 article from a month or two before, and now she can celebrate this victory. So again, it gets exposure. There's the Times covering it. Richard Dawkins, again, the celebrity element here, launches the There Is No God adverts across Britain, because obviously now that we'd raised so much more money, the campaign could spread further. Atheist buses denying God's existence take to the streets, so the Telegraph had to eventually give some credit. This was one of many articles about the slogan itself, which people seem to want to discuss endlessly. So it says we're not quite sure because of the word probably in there, and this was all the time for months of my life. People were saying, why have you said probably? Surely if it's an atheist bus campaign, then it's definitely, you should have said there's definitely no God. And you just sort of think, well, we could have said that, but given how popular it was, you've got to be pretty damn sure. If you think you're suggesting a modification to the slogan that would improve it, given how popular it was, on what basis are you making that claim? And do you really think that some of the people who backed a campaign saying there's probably no God, it's flippant, it's sort of fun, like someone can assign to that whether they're basically agnostic or basically definitely an atheist. They can still say there's probably no God in a kind of cheeky, facetious way. Whereas a phrase, there's definitely or there's obviously no God, surely some people would have just felt, well, no, I'm not going to back that. That sounds like I'm making a claim too far somehow. Anyway. Atheist bus campaign spreads the word of no God nationwide, and that's highlighting there the video. So I think the fact that there was this very specific occasion where the press could come and see a bus and it's got balloons on it and Richard Dawkins is there. It sounds superficial, but that's important. That gives them the marker in the sand where they can say this is where the event happened. This was the launch of that campaign. It's an excuse to talk about atheism again in the press. This was this is a video, I think, from of the campaign launch itself. This is my favourite example of something that the BHA had nothing to do with, but which happened anyway, and again, kind of backs up this idea of its organic and open nature. Someone came up with this idea, I'm going to create a website. All it does is let you type in your own words and put them on the side of a bus and create your own meme, your own image of the bus campaign. This was very popular. We got lots of traffic from the page itself, so people have bounced around their ideas and they've made up. People used it to propose their own better versions of the slogan again, or to create Christian versions or versions on other things. I think that illustrates an important point, that it's good to kind of let go a bit. If we'd policed it all and said, you can't do that, you have to put a big link to our site on there and make sure that you encourage people to donate if they come and visit it, or this is ours, you've created this slogan generator, but we're going to embed it on our site instead so that it's clearly ours, then there may have been some short-term benefit to having it there, but I think the fact that it was organic and out in the community and someone else was doing it just showed that level of interest, and that it's good to let loose control of the campaign a bit. This was a map of where all the buses ended up. Again, just important to have that visual aid. It's important for people to be able to see, without reading a paragraph of boring text, where the ads are going. Is it coming near me? Is it coming to my town? Or where's the nearest place? That's really hard to see in a block of text, but very easy on a map. This is Jeremy Paxman on the program The University Challenge, which is a really popular mainstream quiz in the UK. asking a question, and this was a real sign for us of like the campaign has definitely made it into the popular consciousness now if a quizmaster is asking questions about it. And it was on Have I Got News For You, which is a satirical news program, so they covered it as one of the big stories of the week, was that this campaign had happened. That was this is another follow-up from, I think this was the American Humanist Association doing an ad the Christmas of that year. And so I think it was the first one where we saw another group being inspired to do an ad, although it's not using the same slogan or the same visuals, but asking for donations to put a particular message on buses. And you can see the link back there to the British campaign in the sidebar. I think it was good that lots of countries that covered it decided to sort of copy the brand very, very closely. And again, that was the BHA just saying, you know what, we can't make anything out of doing this elsewhere. But the BHA is an internationally minded organisation. IHEU has been based in the office there for some time. And they said, if you want to run a campaign like this and you're a humanist or an atheist organisation, then we will give you the right to use the visuals and the slogan such as it is. It was Italian there, I think, or Spanish. Fox News mocks atheist bus for putting ads on buses. I enjoyed that story. This is just more of the follow-up campaigns from various different organisations. So I want to talk about a few things briefly. We've got about 10 minutes with the overrun. What didn't work, or could we have followed up better? Well, I do think that the way that the BHA let go of the campaign was very good, but we hadn't expected it to do as well as it did. And one of the first things that fundraisers will tell you is plan for success. It's very awkward if you accidentally raise lots more money for something that you can't spend it on, or if you don't know what to do with it next. So this is a follow-up campaign that came later, which was the Don't Label Me campaign. And this sort of took a passage from one of Dawkins' books about how it's wrong to label children, whether you label them atheists or Muslims or Christians or whatever, just as it would be wrong to label them by a political affiliation. And this became a new thing to put on buses where people would donate, but it's now more directly to the BHA, but there are adverts that result and there's a campaign, but also some of the funds will go to support the work that the BHA does, campaigning on education issues, humanism in schools, and against state-funded faith schools. So that came a while later. And that's what that looked like. I think one issue with this campaign, I think it looks okay. It looks kind of pretty. There's some children there. It's a little, maybe it's not all that clear immediately. You know, I was involved in this, so I can say this. I don't think it's entirely clear what's going on there. And the labels have been relegated into the background. Atheist child, Muslim child. If you can't make them out, they're sort of faded into the white background. It'd be very easy just to not see them at all. And so I think this was less hard-hitting than it could have been. It could have, you know, stamped particular labels on the children in a more obvious way, and people are going, oh yeah, that is more obviously wrong. But these kids look quite happy, so they're obviously happy because they're not being labelled, and the labels are in the background. But I think it's a more confused message somehow. But it still managed to create problems, even though it was almost deliberately not very hard-hitting. It still managed to cause controversy in Northern Ireland. Humanist poster stirs up religious storm. Reverend David McIlveen is quoted as saying, it's none of their business how people bring up their children. It is the height of arrogance that the BHA would even assume to tell people not to instruct their children in the religion. So very much missing the point that the advert is saying it's the height of arrogance to instruct children exactly what religion to be. The money. So lots of people asked about how the money is spent. People who didn't understand it was being fundraised from the public says, why is the BHA, which has charitable status, spending its money on this campaign? But obviously that wasn't true. But what was true is that a significant amount of money was raised for an organisation that has assets of, at the time, less than about £1 million. So the big square there represents £1 million or so pounds. And just to put that into context, Amnesty International, another big lobbying organisation on human rights issues in the UK, has something in excess of £10 million assets at the time. And I'm going to shrink both of those down so that we can compare that to the Church of England, which has about £5 billion in assets. So it's a valid point if someone says, you've got this very small amount of assets, relatively speaking, why all that money on the buses? And well, obviously it wasn't, we didn't plan for that success. We didn't know it was all going to go on there. It could have been so here to really labour the point is what happened. Here's all the people with their money that they wanted to give to the campaign. We fundraise from them, we solicit them in all these various different ways. They give that money to the Just Giving appeal under the auspices of the British Humanist Association. But then all that money goes on the buses, and it's gone. So, have we promoted the message? Definitely, there's been some awareness raising. But in order to get donors or members or activists out of this, people who are going to be involved, we have to bring all those people that donated or were interested or even just heard about the campaign into the organisation. And we were able to do this partly because Just Giving let people opt in to that exact thing. So when they gave their money and they had their conversation and they found a community on this site, they were able to tick a box that said, yeah, keep me informed. I want to be added to the British Humanist Association mailing list. Here again is the points on the campaign that we've singled out. Ariane Shireen writing the initial article, the fundraising page going up, the press launch event, and the follow-up Please Don't Label Me campaign. Here is number of new members plotted against that on a month-by-month basis. So you can see that shortly after each of these events, or on the month of these events, there is a sudden kind of spike in new members going up. The Don't Label Me campaign there, the date that you can see plotted is the date of the launch when the posters went up. But if we bring that back to the point when the media coverage was going out, you can see that that clearly has had another little spike in new membership growth. So it wasn't the adverts themselves. The adverts on the buses, on the billboards, whatever it was, in our experience, they were entirely redundant. They didn't bring new members to the organisation. It was the press coverage that really capitalises on that. That's pushed all of that down, so we've now got beginning of 2008 there, so we can extend this back in time just to see so that's an automatically generated trend line. You can see that there is a real climb throughout that year after the campaign is launched and discussed. There are the items that we've seen. So before the Atheist Bus campaign, the number of new members the British Humanist Association was getting every month were regularly less than 100, often less than 50 new members per month. Afterwards, they're never less than 100 new members a month and are frequently much higher. And just to show the kind of validity of that data, this other big spike you can see from before, this is Linda Smith, a radio comedian who died, unfortunately, and there was lots of press coverage about her death and her obituary because she was quite young, very, very well loved, and so a lot of the obituaries and news articles about her death mention the British Humanist Association. So again, although obviously it's not something that you can or would want to replicate very often, the death of a high-profile supporter, a president in this case, created something like a comparable level of press traffic, and that point is a big mail shot that was done. So you can see that spending thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds on a mail shot is bringing roughly the same order of magnitude as new members as some of these other press events. Around the launch of the Atheist Bus campaign, the BHA also immediately started trying to get back in touch with some of these people and their wider members who'd been reminded of the BHA's existence and seen this advert and seen the press coverage, and said, we want to raise money to support our work on faith schools. So there was another Just Giving page that was also asking for funds, but this time directly for the work. And this is easily overlooked, I think, in their campaign, that although all that money went on buses, there was this other opportunity to, at the same time, go and ask people to support the actual work. Around the time of the launch, again, with this heightened attention, there was a Next Step campaign launched. And I have to say, this is one of the things that was a thing to learn from. It was good to go out and ask and try to capitalize. This particular page was not very good. This was very quick. This was, okay, we've got our big launch event, there's lots of press going out, what else can we ask people to do? Make a general donation. Here there's lots of things wrong. Suddenly, we don't really know what this picture is. There's a happy human, it's by a bus stop, so it's sort of about the bus campaign, but the bus campaign visuals have gone. There's no clear link between this ask and the bus campaign. It's very general, it's a general donation to support all the BHA's work. So it's one of those traps you can fall into when fundraising, is you want to say, look at all this amazing stuff that we do, rather than go into lots of detail about one specific area of work. So this was not as popular. It raised a significant chunk of money, but not as much, I think, as it could have done if we'd had longer and thought more about it and had a clearer message. And obviously there's the Don't Label Me campaign itself. And there we learned a lesson from the Atheist Bus campaign, which was to say, this is what we want for the for the posters, for the advertising, and what we raise in addition will go and support some other work that we actually do, or maybe you can make it a proportion or a percentage of the money raised. But there are pros and cons to this. If you have to say, oh well, some of the money isn't going on these billboards that you can see, these nice deliverable visual things that you can see, some of it's going on other work that's kind of intangible and pays someone's salary, then it's not as sexy. A lot of people don't like that as much. They're not as attracted to it if they feel like there's small print in your ask. So I think it was worth doing in this case, but I think that the Atheist Bus campaign itself probably wouldn't have been as successful if we'd done that from the start. It was necessary to just spend on the adverts at the beginning. But for that, because we did that initially, and because all that money just went on buses, actually, through these other means, and by building these people into our contact database and segmenting them, so they've always been clearly marked as Atheist Bus donors. We know the people that came to us through one campaign rather than another. Although we lose this column of income from the Atheist Bus campaign, because it's never really our income at all, it was all spent on buses, we did gain, in that first year, a significant chunk of new membership money and donations to those particular appeal codes and general donations. So we redistribute those on top of our graph, and suddenly we can see that although we didn't get the Atheist Bus money, we did get this other money that we know pretty much you couldn't have got unless that campaign was run. Some proportion of that is recurring, because some of it's recurring membership subscriptions, recurring donations, so it's coming back year after year. So that 150,000+ pounds that was raised specifically for the Atheist Bus adverts was all made back for the BHA within 18 months of the campaign launching. So they had an equivalent amount that was run within a year and a half. It surprised us that lots of people in the advertising world were very interested in the campaign, because it's not something we were used to doing, but it got lots of coverage specifically amongst media and advertising people. JustGiving.com loved it, of course, because for them it was a source of lots of links and traffic. They took a cut, and so their marketing and media people discussed it at some length. They ran several stories on their own blog about the campaign itself and how it had raised this funding. And what they said in their coverage was, the routes to success can be summarized as the following. Prepare to lose a certain amount of control. Make it easy to share content online. Reach out to bloggers as well as traditional PR and print media. Enable people to have conversations about your appeal. Be prepared to be imaginative and take risks. Clearly, the recipe for the success of the Atheist Bus campaign cannot be easily copied to provide exactly the same results for every appeal, but the pointers above show the potential exists when all these different strands come together to create a true viral online phenomenon. This is another site, just briefly, Fair Say campaign. Donating is a campaigning action. So it does a long analysis, again, of the campaign and says, what are the lessons? Starting trying to integrate donations as a campaign action. So you're not just asking for money to support some area of work that might well happen anyway, but to do a very specific deliverable thing, to link donations to the success of the campaign actions. In the case of something like an advertising appeal, it's directly proportional in principle. The more we get, the more we can do. Be prepared for success. And as they said, I don't know if the British Humanist Society is for supporters to have a more ambitious vision than the organisation. So, as I said, I think there were elements of not being as prepared as we could have been, but then trying to make the most out of this huge amount of attention. And tell your fundraisers, campaigning can be income generating, using the fact that you're doing this campaign, an advertising campaign, to reinvest the lessons. That's the end of my talk for now, and we're out of time.